Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, now that I can breathe. It's, with the current protocols, I just thought I'd point out that when you are actually distanced as we are up here and actually holding a conversation, asking questions or speaking or anything, the protocols are from the Health Commission that the mask may be removed. So that's why both Jackie and I and the other participants here tonight can remove their mask. Could I begin by firstly acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land we're gathered on, the Gubbi Gubbi Nation, and respectfully honour their elders, past, present and emerging in Jamara. I'd like to welcome you to the Redcliffe Writers Open Mic tonight. A very special night, very special event. We welcome you all. The Redcliffe Writers Open Mic is conducted in conjunction with the Moreton Bay Regional Libraries, and I'll be talking a little more towards the end about some of the events that the Moreton Bay Regional Libraries have coming up for writers and readers. Excellent support for the libraries throughout the whole region for both writers and readers in the Moreton Bay region, so it's wonderful. Two very special authors with us tonight. The first, it gives me great pleasure actually to welcome back Jackie Smith. Jackie was here reading her poems, her collection of poems, just prior to the book being actually printed and released. So now the book is available. We're very fortunate. Jackie is a freelance journalist, editor and proofreader, and a marketing graduate from Brisbane. She writes a blog, and the Nostalgia Collection, her first book of poetry, is an accumulation of narrative poetry that Jackie has written over several years. Some of the pieces, some of the poems are very personal, sparked by current world events and Jackie's own experience. But together, she says, they mark fragments in time, acting as snapshots of the world, how she and others see it. Could you please welcome Jackie Smith. So Jackie, would you please start with a poem? Let's hear one of your poems, and then then I'll ask you to explain a little bit about yourself and the poem.
This is a poem I've written called Anti-Gravity. Gravity is not my friend. It cuts me like a knife. We meet frequently on the battlefield at dawn, not far from Newton's apple tree. We battle for purchase on unceded land. Its force strong enough to knock me off balance, but too weak to keep me upright. This branch does not bend, it breaks. Succumbing to invisible barriers it cannot sustain. But out there, in space, I take comfort in the knowledge that I will one day be weightless, light as a feather, stardust, a memory whose impression will forever live on.
Wonderful, thank you, thank you. Jackie, what inspired that poem?
I think it was probably one of the first times I'd written about my disability. It was sparked from a prompt in a poetry workshop that I do every week with an American poet called Neil Hilborn. I think the prompt was science or scientific theories you don't necessarily believe in, and it just prompted that poem.
It's almost like a sort of an otherworldly feel. Is that what that was what you were aiming at?
Yeah, I guess so. It was guess you could say that I hadn't really thought about it that way.
The visual of the sort of the branch, and then looking at the weightlessness of outer space, the contrast of the two. Do you want to just talk about that a moment, and how that came to you?
Okay, so with my disability, obviously I fall over a lot, or fairly regularly.
Gravity
so,
can be a very hard thing, can't it?
So yeah, anti-gravity. Yeah, and I guess the idea of a tree and Newton's theory of gravity was that everything remains upright or planted on the ground. I guess I'm not very scientific, but yeah. So that's where it started, and this is just the poem that came out of it, I guess.
A sense of freedom, a sense of questing for that possibility of being free of gravity. Before you read on to another poem, are there any questions that anybody has of this particular poem or of Jackie, first of all? Any questions from the audience? Yes, in the back.
Jackie, would you mind telling me what disability you have?
So I have cerebral palsy. I've had it since I was born. Yeah, so it's just something that I've always dealt with. And as I said, this was probably the first time I actually considered writing about it in a kind of whimsical way, I guess, because it's not directly saying anything related to disability in the poem. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions before I ask you to choose another poem? Let's hear another poem of your choice, and you can tell us a little bit about it either before or after you read, whichever you prefer.
This one is called Milky Way. Tell me I'm kaleidoscope dreaming, all hail the golden moon. I walk the sunsets, follow the dawn, dance till twilight envelops me in its reverie. Damaged stars shatter in a shimmering light, sparking the sky with diamonds, born from inky coal and abandoned promises. I don't know if I believe in your God, a celestial being unproven by scientists, but I do believe in light. I've seen its power, the way it calls in the shadow of darkness, like a candle burning its flame.
The light burning in the darkness. There's a real sort of opening in your poetry, isn't there? An opening to the mystery. Is that what you'd call it?
I'd say with this particular collection, there's a real nostalgia to it. I guess, given that it is called the Nostalgia Collection, that's not really something that I'd considered, but I think it is open to interpretation for other people, just as I said, just because I wrote Anti-Gravity about my disability or my dislike of gravity sometimes. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's what it will mean to everybody else who reads the poem.
And that, I think you'd agree, is the beauty of writing, and particularly of poetry, in that the listener, in this case, or the reader, actually brings their own sort of reflection and their own meaning to the poem. Is that to you there is a real whimsical and a sort of a real, I called it otherworldly, but in the sense that it's an expression of something other in the poems that you've read so far, I think.
Yeah.
Something that makes you think.
I think that would be a good way of describing it.
Are there any comments or questions from anyone in the audience at this stage? I think, yes, right.
Jackie, sorry, I don't know your history of your poetry, but Is this your first book?
This is my first book, yes.
So when did you feel that you collected enough poems together to produce a book?
Probably at the beginning of this year, I was like, right, I've done enough. This poetry collection has about 90 pages in it, so around the same amount of poems in it as there is pages in the book. So that was around when I decided that, right, I've got to do something with this collection.
And for how long before you thought that you had enough? Had you been writing anything?
Okay, so this book contains poems. Some of them I wrote when I was 15, some of them I wrote earlier this year. So I've been writing them for about 17 years. Poetry, so yeah, and it was only early this year that I decided I've got enough.
So it's aptly named, I think, the Nostalgia Collection. It's a look back on what your life has been so far, is it?
Yes, not all of the poems are nostalgic. They're not all reflective on memory. A lot of them are, but I personally don't think you can tell the difference really from the ones that I wrote when I was 15 to the ones that I wrote, a couple of months before I published.
Probably because they were written from the heart.
Yeah, I guess you could say that.
As good poetry is. Any other questions at the moment? Rebecca, please.
So when you started writing your poems, did you believe that you were going to have published when you chose your selection?
When I chose the poems that I wanted in the manuscript, I knew that I was going to publish it because I was preparing it to self-publish myself. So I knew that was my process. Obviously, when I was 15, I didn't really know that I was going to publish them in a collection. There are a lot of poems that I've written that I didn't include in this collection, whether I will include them in another collection later or whether they'll just be poems I've written that don't get published. That's fine. But I've always wanted to publish a book, and by doing this, I was able to mark off that milestone. Probably a bucket list item I've had since I was about 6. So yeah, that was my intention behind.
And we're all very pleased you did. That's I'm sure. Is there another question, or if not, then I'd ask Jackie if there was another poem that she'd like to read. We've time for a few more.
Okay, so this one is called My Procrastination. Your fingertips tell me that you are ready, that it is almost time, as they grasp my hand a little tighter every time I see you. The crack in your voice through the phone line tells me you are getting older, but are prepared to meet your fate. But I am not. I can't allow that. So when I pull away from your tender touch, it's not that I don't love you. I love you too much to let you go.
Very personal poem. Do you want to tell us a little bit what you can?
It is a very personal poem. It's one that I wrote about my nan. My nan and I had a very special relationship. So this one I actually wrote, I'd say it was about 2012 that I wrote this poem. And she only passed away in 2015, so she was alive for a long time between me writing this poem and her eventual passing. But I think it was just my way of acknowledging that she was getting older, and there was one you know, it was just me coming to terms with the fact that she was getting older, and eventually I would have to say goodbye, I guess.
And there was a very special bond between you.
Yes, probably the Nostalgia Collection probably wouldn't exist without her, because a lot of the poetry I have written in this collection is about her, or about my relationship with her, or the grief that I experienced when she passed. So a lot of it is that, which is partly why it is called the Nostalgia Collection, because it's a reflection on that grief and our relationship, and I guess the person that it's made me into by having that relationship.
She encouraged you?
Yes.
And then,
Yes.
a wonderful woman by the sound of it.
Yes, she was.
Questions, please, yes.
May I ask if you're able to read that again? Now that I have that insight to look at, I'd like to hear it again with that insight, because I interpreted it differently, and I'd like to hear it again from that perspective, if that's possible.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Your fingertips tell me that you are ready, that it is almost time, as they grasp my hand a little tighter every time I see you. The crack in your voice through the phone line tells me you are getting older, but are prepared to meet your fate. But I am not. I can't allow that. So when I pull away from your tender touch, it is not that I don't love you. I love you too much to let you go.
Yes. It's incredibly powerful images that your writing conjures up there, Jackie. Any other questions or comments, please?
Jackie, did you write Milky Way around that same time? Is that one?
As my procrastination?
Yeah.
No. So Milky Way was written, I'd say, a month or two before I decided to publish. My procrastination was written, as I said, in 2012, a long time ago.
Any other questions? Bev, please.
Can you trace back when it was that you first thought you would write poetry?
So I started writing poetry when I was about 15. It wasn't a conscious decision that I thought, oh, I'll start writing poetry. I've written stuff like books and stories, I guess, since I was about 6. So it's just been that gradual progression, and I think poetry is the medium that I'm probably most comfortable in now. I wouldn't see myself going back to fiction or short stories.
Did you read poetry when you were younger?
I didn't. Actually, I did. Actually, I read Jill's A Night Without Armour. So Jill the singer. I read her poetry book when I was about 9, and I loved it because I love Jill. But it wasn't, as I said, it wasn't like a conscious gravitation towards that medium until I was a teenager, and it kind of just eventuated that way, that my emotions were coming out in poetry.
It was just something you had to share. That's wonderful. Any other questions before I ask Jackie to choose another poem? Jackie, I think time for another. If there's another that you'd like to share with us,
Yeah. Will this be the last one?
I think we've got time for 2 more.
2 more?
I think.
Okay, cool.
Would people like 2 more?
Yes.
It's certainly thoroughly enjoyable.
So this is the poem that is probably the title piece. It is called Nostalgia. On days like this, when memory is not far from the surface, I am grateful for the time I had with you. I can hear it, the sounds of laughter and your voice, something I thought I'd forgotten, those melodic sounds. Close my eyes and I can almost touch you. Your tissue-like skin all mottled in places, the red, white and deep blue of veins overworked. I miss you.
Wonderful. You want to tell us a little about that one? And again, a personal poem.
Yes.
Isn't it?
So that one was written. I think it was written earlier this year. It was just I was doing a workshop with Anna Jacobson, the poet, and because her own work is very grounded in family and personal experiences, we had to, like, the prompt or the purpose of the workshop was drawing from memory to write poetry, and obviously the nostalgia, the poem, came out of this, and then it encompassed the whole manuscript.
Wonderful. There's a real sensitivity. It's within the poetry that expresses that connection between yourself and your nan, I assume?
My name.
Yeah. And there was it's incredibly strong, that connection, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
Any other comments or questions, please, Mike?
From what we've heard this evening, it's been really good, really enjoyed it. All very short, concise messages. In your book, do you have longer sections there? Or are they all short and concise?
So the longest poem I think in here spans just on 2 pages. So if I were to publish a collection, like another collection, it would be longer pieces because I've been working on longer pieces. But yeah, this collection is quite short. As I said, it's 90 pages and there are approximately around the same number of poems in here as there are pages.
Jackie, can I just ask you to expand on that a little? You said you're writing on or working on longer pieces now. Can you just explain how you're finding the difference between what you want to say in the pieces that you've, like, for example, you've read here tonight, and the longer ones you're working on at the moment? What are some of the differences and challenges
Sure.
that you face?
So I guess it's more about it's not an intentional thing that they're longer. It's just I guess it's more experimentation with style and growing as a poet and exploring what I can do differently in each poem to make it stand out from other poetry and things like that, not necessarily other people's poetry. But how I can make one poem of mine stand out from another poem of mine. So it's just experimenting with length and subject and style and
Image?
Yes,
Are the
image,
images
yes.
different in,
yes,
in the way you see them? They move more fluidly?
yeah, I think that's something I'm experimenting with as well.
Interesting. We'll certainly be looking forward to the second. Any other questions? If not, I'll ask Jackie to choose her last poem, and then we'll just open it up to general questions as well. Jackie?
Okay, this last one is called Isolation. I don't remember your jokes, but I know how I felt when you told them. That warm embrace like hot chocolate in midwinter. This memory holds me softly at night, transcending time and distance, reminding me that this too shall pass, and tomorrow I am one day closer to seeing you again.
Wonderful. Do you want to just talk about that one a little bit?
Okay, so this one has a bit of a funny story attached to it. So my family and I were going down to Sydney last year, around the time that we were in lockdown. It was around November we were supposed to go. And we were telling my now 4-year-old nephew that it was one more big sleep until, like, we were doing a countdown. So 4 more big sleeps, 3 more big sleeps until he would see us again. And so every time I called him, he was like, oh, it's 3 more big sleeps. We would go, yeah, it's 3 more big sleeps. And so it was just about that whole countdown process, I guess, of that kind of offhand conversation that I had with my nephew that sparked this poem. And a lot of people in my family actually thought it was like a death poem, I guess. You know, counting down the days until you eventually die. But that wasn't my intention. So I called it isolation because it related to the time that I wrote it in, as in we were in lockdown, we were isolated, quarantined, everything like that. And also to highlight that it wasn't actually a death poem, it was actually supposed to be a very happy poem.
It's interesting how people read different things from their own sort of perceptions. Isn't
Exactly,
it?
and they read it straight away before it was actually titled or something. So they didn't realise that was the intention behind it, and then I had to quickly explain to them, no, I had this conversation with Ewan, and he said this, and we're doing a countdown of when we can get there. And
It's the difference between somebody seeing something as counting down to a closure, to an end,
yes,
and somebody seeing something counting down to a beginning,
yeah,
a joyful moment, and a redirection.
It's not something I even considered when I wrote the poem, when I gave it to my auntie to read. It wasn't something I even considered, and that is my mum's phone. So yeah, it wasn't something that I even considered. But yeah, I don't even mind that. I don't even mind that people interpret it that way. But yeah, I like that it's open to interpretation, that some people will interpret it as a happy poem, especially if you are in quarantine or separated from your family, because all my family lives down in Sydney, so all my extended family, so it's just me and my mum and my dad up here. So yeah, I like that.
Yeah, and it's the nature of writing, isn't it? That as I said earlier, that so many people bring their own sort of perceptions and their own message to what they have read. Any questions or observations, comments of a general nature to Jackie? Bev first, then yourself.
I noticed that most of the poems I've heard you read are about your relationships with people. Are all your poems like that, or are some to describe?
The ones that I've read today are more about relationships and family relationships. I do in here have poems that are directly related to current events. Like I have a poem called riot that I wrote the day they had on the news about the riot at the White House. So I have a poem about that. I see isolation also as a response to current events poem, as well as being personal and having that personal connotation for me, because as I said, it's a reflection of the current times that we're in.
Yes.
Yeah, just a comment really, not a question. It's listening to your poems, and my husband, he mentioned about the length of the poem, but to me, what you're saying is very much true of the less is more. You say so much to me, and it just comes to life with just what you're saying there, with a few words, and you put them together so well.
Thank you.
It's just brilliant.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yes, there's the opening of the thought process.
that's right. Yeah.
Becca.
Have you wrote about your experience with your disability? Not exactly about your disability, but more with how you go with everyday life.
Anti-gravity would probably be as close as I have. As close as I've got so far. It's not. See, I don't really see it as a topic of conversation. It's just who I am. Like, it's just part of it. So it's not really. It's not something that it's not something that I want people to look at and go, hey, this is a disability poem, because it's not necessarily a disability poem. People who know me will know that anti-gravity, yes, she hates gravity, she falls over a lot, that's a poem about her disability. But it doesn't necessarily have to be that way if Jim or somebody or a random off the street read the poem, they might interpret it completely differently, and I think that is what I wanted to achieve with this collection, and what I guess poetry is meant to do.
It is meant to express yourself, and regardless of labels,
Yeah.
because labels are completely unnecessary, aren't they?
Yes, I think so.
You are who you are. And,
Right.
and as far as gravity is concerned, those of us who are aging face the same problem. I'm including myself in that. Any other questions, please, or comments? Yes, down the back and then down the front.
You're right.
Johnny, please.
I've been privileged to see you before. I'm sorry I'm late tonight. I
No,
got an
it's
email
fine.
at the wrong time, so I do apologise for that. I love your growth, how you, not only on your poetry, but doing open mic, which I've done, is not the easiest thing to do. And seeing how you're growing, doing it now, because writing a book's one thing, selling it's another thing.
Yes.
And the way you're doing it and presenting it is great. Keep up the
Thank
great
you.
work. It's fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you, Johnny. So,
Guilty of thinking that your isolation was one step closer to death, so I've probably misinterpreted it.
Yeah, well, that's kind of your reading, isn't it, Susan?
Yeah.
I go to book club with Susan, and she reads very dark books.
Yeah, maybe that's maybe.
Yeah.
But having said that, do you think your writing has changed or will change now that you've got this really tangible evidence that other people are reading it? Like, are you more aware that you've got an audience?
No.
good question.
It's probably something that I'm really getting used to. So it's only it was published in April, but it's only really just now hit all the distribution issues have been fixed and stuff, because I did have them. So now it is available in Booktopia, Book Depository, Amazon, from the self-publisher's website, you know, so there's a couple of channels that people can get it now, as well as from me and here tonight. So it hasn't really hit me that I have an audience. It's probably not until we go to book club and people are like, hey, I read Jackie's book this month. So it's kind of starting to hit me now, but it hasn't really kind of hit me that anybody outside of people I know what it is. I did get a message from a friend from my poetry circle in the US who had ordered a copy, and their copy arrived this week, so that was very exciting that it is now actually in another country.
You're now an internationally published author.
Yes, apparently so. I was very excited.
Good.
Yes, but that's probably only just starting to gain momentum, and it is probably something that I will freak out about now that you've said it.
Sorry, that wasn't the intention.
Jackie, please keep being yourself, because being yourself is what has come through tonight in your readings from your work, and that's your strength, and the strength of your writing is wonderful. So I think this is an appropriate time to ask you all to thank Jackie Smith, whose books are available, please. And when we finish, we have one more reader, so could you please thank Jackie Smith?